Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, everyone. We'll call to order the March 8th Select Board meeting to order. There's no changes to the agenda except we're taking off one pending contract. We'll get to that. Announcements. Greg?
Hi, good evening.
Hi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's been a while since I've been up here. There's not much heavy lifting tonight for my role. Announcements. Remind everybody that the Select Board meeting is being audio and video recorded. And aside from that announcement, unless the chair or the board has an announcement.
Thank you, Greg. Anything from the comments from the board? Brooke?
I heard a comment earlier today that trash blowing out of construction sites and dumpsters with all the wind we've been having is, just wreaking havoc on stuff around the island. And so I would encourage people who are engaging in construction work to keep their sites clean and tied down and do their best to keep dumpsters from releasing a lot of trash into the air. And pickup trucks, et cetera.
Thank you, Brooke. Anything else? Nope. Okay, there's no follow-up comments from prior Select Board meetings. Public comment. Is there any public comment tonight for items that are not on the agenda? Looking around the room first. Nope. We go to online. We have Bridget Petroselli.
Hi, I'm just wondering, is this the Nantucket Conservation Commission meeting?
Nope, this is the Select Board meeting.
Okay, so how do I get to that meeting?
There isn't a Conservation
Is
Commission
that
meeting
tomorrow at
tonight.
4? Usually it's Thursdays, right?
Yeah, if you go to the town website.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. You're right.
That's
I have
okay.
the wrong day. Thank you. Sorry.
That's okay.
Not a worry.
Thanks, Bridget.
Okay.
Thank you. Can you go to Megan Perry?
Should ask Megan if she's got the wrong meeting.
Megan, are you at the correct meeting?
I know you'll all be disappointed. I am at the correct.
ahead.
Thank you for taking my call. I was just following up on pretty much every comment that I've made since February 1st at public comment regarding the conservation management permit that was issued and was sent to 3 different town departments and not sent out to the public. I also did a follow-up comment in email to every member of this board regarding it. And for some reason, it just keeps getting left off the agenda, not discussed, no follow-up comment regarding it. And I'm wondering, is at any point this board going to bring it up, discuss it, talk about it? I'm happy to keep calling in for every public comment and keep asking if you guys need more time. So yes, I'm asking a question and I know you don't answer questions on the spot, but could somebody get back to me, whether it be via email, at a meeting, phone call, text? I don't care really how it happens, but could somebody get back to me at some point? Because it's well over a month that I brought this up at every meeting. And I would just like to know if this board is going to take any action regarding it, or make a policy, or do anything regarding the lack of notification for the conservation management permit for Surfside Crossing that was sent down from the state to 3 different departments of the town. That definitely comes into play with litigation that the town is currently in regarding this project. So thank you very much for taking my call. I'll try to bounce over to another meeting and see if they have anything to say about it as well. Have a great night.
Thanks, Megan. Any other public comment tonight that's not on the agenda? Okay, moving on. There's no new business. May I have a motion for approval of the minutes, payroll warrants, and treasury warrants?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 That passes 5-0. Pending contracts. Any questions?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can we just note that one of the contracts is coming off, which is the TNT roofing for the salt shed?
Yeah, so when we make the motion,
Yeah, I just wanted to make
pull
that
that off.
announced.
in the motion. Okay. Malcolm,
I'm sorry, which was that?
the TNT roofing, that's been taken off.
Okay. I was
I was just wondering about the one natural resources for Arcadis, because I went back to Article 10 and I really couldn't find wording that matched this particular contract.
Okay.
Sure.
I'm confused.
You want to start,
Mr. Chair?
Greg? Yep.
Sure, I'll jump on in. I know we do have Jeff Carlson, Natural Resources Director, on the line, but Malcolm, did you happen to go to fiscal year 23 or ATM 23? Because it's actually it was actually the 20, if you looked at it, it's actually.
I looked,
in
it
the-
was 22, which is
22.
fiscal year 23. And there was a couple items, one about my Comet Pond and one about the harbor, but it just didn't seem to match.
I'll look that up now, because I looked up a couple today and they're the previous year. They're not the number that's there, but I'm gonna look this one up, and if we have Jeff.
Yeah, Jeff's got his hand up.
You'll have him update you.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Jeff Carlson, Natural Resources Director. Apologies for the coughing. Part of the confusion with it is when it was listed as part of Article 10, it wasn't listed under Natural Resources. It's listed under Town Administration for the amount for the sediment transport and dredge plan. So if you had only looked under Natural Resources, you wouldn't have seen it, but it's in a different section of that Article 10.
Yeah, I did find it in the town administration, just the wording didn't seem to match. So I was wondering if someone could explain the transport study, because it doesn't really talk about that in that article. Assuming I had the right article, which I think I did.
Jeff, do you have an answer for that?
No, I thought it had. Let me try to bring up my copy of it. Sorry, my computer's giving me a little bit of a headache at the second. So
Yeah,
give
the
me
website was slow.
10 seconds and I'll have it right up.
While Jeff's looking for that, is there any, let's put that on hold for a second. Is there any other comments on this or another item? Matt, do you have anything?
No.
Okay.
Why was the salt shed roof taken off? Is that not?
There was improper procurement, and so it has to be rebid.
Yeah, it has to be rebid.
Gotcha. Okay.
Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in Article 10, under Town Administration, there is a $550,000. There was a $550,000 appropriation that specifically references costs associated with sediment transport and dredge plan. So it would be, after reviewing this particular solicitation, the procurement office and the finance department do believe that that fits the intent of that article that was approved at the annual town meeting.
All right.
At SHAB, there's been some discussion of people would like to have the whole sediment transport done more quickly. And the reality, when talking to Vince, is that even if we had all the money, we don't have all the staff. And even though you're hiring a consultant to do the work, there's still a lot of staff support that has to go into these studies. And there's a lot of questions, and the people that you hire are always calling you and saying, what about this? And where do I find that? And, et cetera. And so there's some, Vince has some concern about being able to support it, even if we did try to do the entire island at once. In an ideal world, we would. In an ideal world, we'd do it and we'd have it done in a year or two. But I think he believes there are some constraints. I would be concerned about, waiting on this or not supporting this, because even if we get half of them, half of the apple, that's, eventually we're going to have the whole apple. And I wouldn't want to be in a situation we were similar to Island Home, where, we put something forward and it didn't pass and people argued about it for 5 more years and we're back at the drawing board. And, I just think that this sediment stuff is really important for a lot of different coastal resiliency. And so we should get the harbor done, as quickly as possible and do it really well, and then get around to the outside, as much as I wish we could do it all at once. So I would hope that we would support it tonight.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
And I did find it, if you want me to read it into the record, it does say costs associated with sediment transport and dredge plan from Article 10.
Move approval?
Second.
1 second.
Oh, sorry.
I just realized there's a contract with Herein Home with Fairlands that I'll recuse from that
Okay.
particular one, so if we can go back.
I'll go back.
I didn't realize that. Yeah.
Everything,
Yeah.
I'll recuse from Fairwinds and we'll remove the TNT roofing.
All right, so I'll make a motion with TNT roofing out and with the Fairwinds article out.
Second.
Just for me.
Yeah.
Me to recuse from it, but
For,
it's still-
yeah, it's still there, but I'm taking it out for
The
Jason is
contract's still there, just
recusing on
Jason's
that.
not.
I make a motion with Jason recusing on that and that's it.
Give a second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
That passes. Thank you.
And then you're going to need a motion for the.
And now somebody else to make a motion for fair one.
Motion to approve the Island Home Fairwinds contract.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, I'll excuse. It's 4-0. Consent items, we have gift acceptance from Human Services, Planning and Land Use Services. Brooke?
Thank you. I love my job. I recommend acceptance of the following gifts to town agencies with notes of thanks to follow. A gift of $20,000 from the Sandbar to support one of the following nonprofit groups: A Safe Place Addiction Solutions and Our House. A gift of $500 for the Saltmarsh Senior Center, and it doesn't say here who it's from. And a gift of $12,000 to Planning and Land Use Department from Harbor Fuel Oil Corporation for pedestrian infrastructure and improvements in connection with Rupert's Way subdivision approval.
Just note the Saltmarsh was from Hal Miller.
Thank you. So again, a motion to approve with letter of thanks to be sent.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That passes unanimously. Citizen Department Committee requests, we have Robert B. Hour. They're requesting a waiver of town noise bylaw for the third sewer force main project on Surfside Road from April 24th to June 2nd from 4 p.m. to 3 a.m. Monday through Thursday nights. We have David Gray and Erica.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much. David Gray, Sewer Director. This is to similar to what we did last year and the year before doing the night work. So we tried to take and alleviate some of the traffic concerns. We have asked for it to be 3 p.m. this year, which is different than the last couple of years. And that would help if they run into some kind of an issue and it takes a little longer to clean up, that we wouldn't be violating any noise bylaws if we're trying to do a cleanup or move a piece of equipment if something had gone on between that 2 and 3 o'clock. So
Mr. Gray, you mean 3 a.m.?
3 a.m. Yeah.
Okay.
From 4 p.m. to 3 a.m. Yeah. So it's just a matter of taking and trying to do the same thing that we did last couple of years. And with the force main project starting, but Monday or Tuesday, we should be making the turn on the Surfside Road heading into town. There may be a time where we have to jump into the roadway just because of overhead wires and different infrastructure that's in the way. So this will cover us for this stretch of time that's needed for this request from RBO and the town.
Erica, anything to add?
Just that I know that some of these infrastructure projects can be frustrating to some people who are trying to get where they need to go. We are working on a detour plan for the project that we're going to be getting out through our public outreach manager. And we just ask that you please bear with us. This is important infrastructure work. We're trying to get it done as quickly as we can. There will be a summer moratorium, so just bear with us.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Okay, Dawn?
How loud do you think it's going to be?
It all depends on
Which
if,
things happen?
if something happens or they need a piece of equipment needs to be moved later on. It might be as simple as just a backup alarm on a piece of equipment, or it could be some vibration of the machine getting off the road for the next day. There shouldn't be any heavy duty pounding or banging of plates or stuff in at that time. That stuff should be all getting pulled back out of the ground around then. So
So not as loud as last year.
it shouldn't be as they were a lot deeper this last year than they were this going to be this year. So it shouldn't be as severe. I'm not saying it won't be, but it should not be as.
I know. I kind of worry about that additional hour, but I also know last time with the 2 a.m. it was going over.
Yeah, we did go over a few times.
I
and
do have the
so-
ability that I can hear it.
Yeah, so we're
And the
trying to,
dogs can hear it.
we're trying to do right and get everything off the road before, but we just requested that extra hour.
It's important. It is important to do it at night.
I'll move approval.
Okay.
Second.
Any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. That passes unanimously. Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Erica.
I almost added another hour just for Don's sake. I couldn't do it.
Just do it 24.
Select board reports, comments, any committee reports? From anyone? I'd like to make a note in record. It's the fastest that we've ever gotten to select board committee reports or an HEC appeal. That's 546. Any committee reports? We good? Okay. HEC appeal. We'll open a public hearing to consider the appeal of Virginia Andrews of the Historic District Commission approval of a certificate of approval. I won't say that long number ends in 5272 for an addition and alteration to a dwelling located at 2 Stone Alley. It's parcel 102. So just want to go over, just to refresh our memories, how appeals go. I just opened a public hearing. The appellant will state their case and reason for the appeal. Then the HDC commission can define their position if they choose to do so. Rebuttals can follow. And usually we let that go back and forth a little bit for healthy discussion, but please talk through the chair in case, instead of talking to each other. And then we'll go to the public. And then when we feel that things are starting to be repeated, then we'll usually close the public hearing and then we'll be able to talk amongst ourselves. We can still ask a question, but we usually don't take anything else from the public at that point once we close the public hearing. So I'll ask a couple times, are we ready to close the public hearing? You know, we're starting to hear things over and over again to be repeated, and then we can make the decision. So that's the appeal process. So would the appellant like to start?
Yes,
I'm
thank
gonna
you.
set- I'm gonna set the
very
table.
much.
Yeah, Arthur, I'm going to set the table as to who's here.
Okay.
Arthur Reed for the appellant, Ginger Andrews is also here. Mary Bergman from MPT is here. I'm here. I'm the ones that sort of led the charge for the last 4 years on this subject. Arthur Reed is here, and I believe Holly Backus is up there, and I believe Esmeralda Martinez, which are both staff for the HDC. The first person that's going to speak is probably Arthur, and then we'll go from there. I'll speak after that. Holly will speak, and then Ginger and Mary will speak.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think Arthur's going to do
Thank
his
you.
thing first.
Thanks. Arthur?
Right, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Linda. I represent Virginia Andrews, Ginger Andrews, owner of the property at 1 Stone Alley, who is aggrieved by the approval by the HDC of the certificate of appropriateness for 2 Stone Alley. The Andrews property is on the opposite side of Stone Alley from 2 Stone Alley. 2 Stone Alley is an individually significant structure. It was a barn going back to the middle of the 19th century, and then in the early part of the 20th century was converted to the home of Eliza Codd, whose father originally owned the property at 14 Orange Street, as well as this, which was connected to. Eliza Codd is a person of great historical significance in Nantucket. She was an early woman architect at a time when not very many women were architects. Her father was a surveyor and engineer on the island, and she worked with him as a child. And then she went to MIT. You don't often think of women having gone to MIT back at the turn of the 20th century, but she did, and she then opened her architectural practice, did a number of houses on Nantucket, and is connected with an all-woman architectural firm in Boston. She's a very historically significant person, and the fact that
this property was her house, was her vision of what should be on this site, is something that I think that the HDC didn't adequately take into consideration when they finally issued the certificate of appropriateness approving this project. The project involves a large addition, a very large addition, which dwarfs the size of the existing structure, and will basically make the existing Eliza Codd house unrecognizable as such. It also adds structure down on the side of Quantity Bank, which is the bank along the area between Union Street and Orange Street. And there are no other houses that are on the side of the bank like this one is. It's been suggested repeatedly in the hearings that took place before the HDC that any addition to the structure should be much less extensive than what was proposed, and that any alteration should come to the east, that is to the south, to the side toward Union Street, rather than rather to the south, rather than to the east, going toward Union Street, which is what was what was proposed and approved. So the structure will be highly visible from Union Street, and will create an incongruous appearance looming up over Union Street, again taking away from the historic nature and scale and scope of the existing structure. We think that the action of the HDC in doing this was arbitrary and capricious. I have to say that I have great sympathy for the members of the HDC and great respect for the work that they do. For a volunteer commission to do the work, spend the time week after week, sometimes multiple meetings per week, that the HDC does, is a grueling undertaking. I have to say, I wouldn't want to do it. And I have, as I say, great respect for them and the fact that they do it. And I have to say that, granted that volume of work, mistakes are going to be made from time to time. And I don't think anything along that line should be held against the HDC. As I say, I have great respect for them. But every once in a while, I have to say, I think they got it wrong. And I think this is a case where they did, and I would respectfully ask that you either overturn the HDC or remand it to give them another opportunity to get it right. And I'll pass on now. I would ask that the preservation planner, Holly Backus, whose comments are in the minutes that are on record, explain what she reported to the HDC at the time of the meetings.
Thank you, Arthur. I forgot to remind everybody to try to keep their comments to 3 to 5 minutes, at least in the beginning. And the more we can do that, we can go back to other people. That was perfect, Arthur. Thank you. Holly?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I will just mention that's a little different than I'm sitting here on the other side of the table. But I think if you look at the record throughout the entire review process, I've been consistent with review comments to the commission on this proposal of this individually significant structure. The dwelling is unique in form, and the addition to it should be subordinate and sensitive with appropriate additive massing, and follow both the guidance from the Secretary of the Interior Standards for rehabilitation, as well as building with Nantucket in mind. And that approach is something that's within our building with Nantucket in mind design guidelines. The Secretary of Interior Standards emphasizes that new additions should be smaller than the historic building and should be subordinate in both size and design. The existing building is 556 square feet, as Eliza Codd left it, and the proposal increased throughout the review process to an addition approved at 1,051 square feet, more than doubling the existing historic structure. The proposal includes the demolition of exterior walls of all 3 floors of the structure, including the basement, first and second floors, and removes much of the existing historic fabric, including the demolition of Eliza Codd's trademark sunroom, a prominent character-defining feature of this historic dwelling. Nothing of of the historic integrity will be left of the structure, as its integrity will be lost, as the design, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association will be lost after this alteration. If constructed, my professional opinion would be that it would not be historic any longer. And although the HDC's jurisdiction is not the interior of a structure, one could argue that the purpose section, section 2 of the special act, where it states through the preservation and protection of historic buildings, is not being abided by with this approval. And that therefore is why I could not support the HDC on this appeal. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. Linda?
Some background. I've been involved with this project for over 4 years now. I was brought into it to actually oppose an application instead of try to get a client an approval on an application. I'm the one who did that report. You should have it in your packet. It's over 100 pages on the significance of this structure, of Eliza Codd, of her father who owned the property. And when she passed away at a very young age, it reverted back to her father's control. And all along, HSAB, when it was in existence, and many HCC members asked for it to be subordinate, like was recommended by Holly. They also asked for it to be denied eventually after 4 years. Now, there are two applications. There was a first 2 years or so where a different a different builder and a different designer, and they withdrew it. And then Matt McEachern, who's here, came in and has taken over the project since then. But they incorporated the record from the first 2 years into the second 2 years. But all along, they've asked for it to be reduced. They've asked for it to be come back up the hill, not to change the grading, work with the grading, drop it. They didn't. And to go south. Now, south is parallel to Orange Street. That's south, as opposed to coming down towards Union Street. It comes very close to Union Street now. And they have refused to do it. The previous group, the current group, unfortunately or fortunately, the owners of this property are also the owners of the house that fronts immediately on Orange Street, and the side of their house is on Stone Alley. So they own both properties. And this, I understand, is a guest house use. But going south, arguably, to be going in front of them, between them and the view of the harbor. But if more of the program was on one floor, which they do have room to go south into the side yard, it wouldn't really block them because they're at a much higher elevation. There's actually a retaining wall below that for this yard. So we've asked all along to go south, south, south. And that's why the HSAB at some point said, well, forget this. They're not listening to the concerns of the HDC or their concerns or Holly's concerns, and they refused to go south. So the thing just kept going towards Union Street. So we've asked a few times, and HSAB asked for it to be denied after a while. We asked for it to be denied due to lack of response to the concerns expressed for 4 years. So when it came down to this approval, we were sort of aghast at the fact that they got rid of all the comments from 4 years and continued to go towards Union Street with a structure that's the tail wagging the dog kind of situation, which is what we ended up with. So we're very concerned about that. And that would be, in my opinion, having served on it for 20 years, would be arbitrary and capricious when you ask for something to be done time and time again, and your preservation planner and the HSAB ask for it to be done that way or deny it, and they go ahead and approve it and eliminate everything that's gone on for 4 years. Now, granted, the design that Matt has come up with was infinitely better than the first 2 years, which were completely non-responsive. But still, they refused to do what had been asked all that time, to go south and to minimize the addition going towards Union Street and back it up the hill. And there were problems. We didn't get a full grading plan, and and as they mentioned earlier, some of Eliza Codd's signature items was that overhang on the Orange Street side, which is remaining, the west wall, and that sun porch and some of the other intricacies of that structure, because it was a barn. It was a horse barn before that. And she converted it, and she's done a lot of structures here. We're only beginning to find all the other ones that she's done. But there are certain things that are really signature of her designs, the overhang, second floor overhangs and these glass-in porches. But that's why we figure that this is a little arbitrary and capricious, because the record is rife. And most of the things in your packet came from me, doing the research and the surveys and stuff like that, and comments and minutes and things like that. But we're concerned. And the record supports the fact that they were arbitrary and capricious. As much as I hate saying that about the HDC, this record is really substantial as to what we asked for, what everybody else asked for. Thank you. And I do have Ginger would like to talk. And then we have Mary Bergman.
Thank you.
So
And we're
we
here
could,
for
so I'm going to
questions.
blame you for the 830 pages.
Yes, you can.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm proud of it.
Yeah, thank you for framing this in the arbitrary and capricious decision. As just a reminder, that's where we're not putting our judgment for the HDC. It's is it arbitrary or capricious? But the context is good as well. And Ginger.
Well, I have to accept responsibility for hiring Linda and making her do it. So the 800 pages are really on my shoulders. I just like to point out that there was dueling historical information presented about this building, and with some research, we were able to prove that the information that Linda and Holly have stated is the correct information. So one of the things in the miles of minutes is that I don't believe that the HDC ever actually discussed specifically the information and the source of information explaining the significance of the building. And one of the interesting things is that as a conversion, you should be able to look at the building and understand it both as a barn and as a house. If you look at Greater Light, which is a later building, you can see that it was a cowshed, and then how the Monahan sisters adapted it. And Eliza Codd's house precedes that. It may have inspired it. I don't know, but I feel that the HCC isn't really doing themselves any help with this particular process, because when they're working with, they do a great job of making things feel less like a sore thumb when they're new. But when you have an old property, it is a long process, and to just kind of give up and approve it is just really disappointing.
Thank you, Ginger.
Hi, everybody. Mary Bergman, the Nantucket Preservation Trust. I think it's, one of the thing that I want to speak to is the idea of what makes something worth preserving and what makes something significant. And I think, raise your hand if you have not heard of Eliza Codd. It's not really a surprise that we don't necessarily, honor or know a lot about women's achievements, I think. And so it's International Women's Day today. So it's interesting that a lot of this hinges on what Ginger was talking about, which is, the Library of Congress records calls this another house versus the Eliza house that we know Eliza Codd owned and adapted and restored and went to. MIT, as you've already heard before, I think, it's important to note that the Secretary of the Interior standards state that a building can be significant because of its associations with important historic events, persons, or historic trends or patterns. And I think on Nantucket, especially as the island was coming up out of that period of decline after the end of the whaling industry, you're starting to see the island revitalize again with tourism. This conversion of, outbuildings into livable spaces fits into that pattern. And preservation doesn't mean that nothing should ever change again, but it means that when something does change, those character defining features should come with it. So you've heard some of those already, like the sun porch. I think it's particularly interesting that Codd was doing kind of exactly what we're talking about, modernizing an old structure. And the INM said that many of the modernized old houses of Nantucket bear the impress of Codd's skill in conserving the characteristics of Nantucket architecture while adding the requirements of modern time. So that's the balance, the line to walk. And I think Ginger's exactly right that this house was not really given its due in sitting down, considering, is it historic? Is it significant? What should we preserve? And then how does that then carry forward? So I would urge you to uphold Ginger's appeal.
Thank you, Mary. Anyone else from the appellant side?
Good evening. My name is Greg Nocilia. I live at 3 Stone Alley. And the building density in that area is already high. And if there was a fire, which, I mean, the Veranda House fire happened, the Eel Point fire happened, and it's just the building density is just, it's already too high. And to make it even more than it is, it's a concern. They don't even, they're still trying to figure out what happened in Eel Point. It was a renovation that they were expanding, and it's still under investigation. But I think increasing the density, building density in that area, if somebody really wants a bigger house, buy 2 that exist. I mean, it's already heavily, getting a fire truck down there wouldn't be possible. Anyhow, thank you.
Thank you, Greg. There'll be time for the public to speak here at the end. So I think we go to the HDC, Esmeralda or Abby Camp. Did you want to start, Esmeralda?
Sure. Good evening. Esmeralda Martinez, HCC Compliance Coordinator for the record. I am responding to this appeal. It was brought forward to you guys. This application was reviewed by the commission 9 times. The record also incorporates the prior application material that started back in December 2018. The subject of the application was a result of withdrawal and resubmission. During the 9 public hearings, there were substantial concerns expressed from the public, abutters, and their representatives, and PT and HSAP advisory group, and some of the HDC commissioners for substantial revisions to the proposed addition and renovation, and negative impact of the existing historic structure within the old historic district. As with any contentions application, the HDC file includes extensive material, as you all know, 850 pages by the aforementioned entities for the commission's consideration in the review of this application. At the last public hearing of this project on November 15, 2022, 4 sitting members were present. The motion was approved by unanimous vote after brief discussion, with further information to be submitted through staff approval process prior to the formal issuance of the COA. Given the lengthy public hearing process and duly consider extensive opposition, the decision was thoroughly considered, and the approval of this application was not arbitrary nor capricious, as alleged by the direct abutter of 1 Stone Alley. Based on the foregoing information, the HDC asked the select board to overturn the appeal and uphold the decision and the approval of the COA. Thank you.
Thank you, Esmeralda. Abby, would you like to speak on this?
Sure. Yes, this was a long process, but I think we were very sensitive to the COD architecture. The main mass was untouched. We kept elements from that main mass as the architect, as it goes down the hill. They dropped the additive massing so that it adhered to the site. And the sunroom that was on the back was restored on the restoration going down the hill. So a lot of the elements, the architect was very sensitive to reincorporate into the design. And as I said, the main mass was left pretty much untouched. So there's the credit gone to the woman architect, and we thought as it, I think it's almost been 4 years that we've worked on this. This was it's a tough site, but I think he did a really good job, and I think we were unanimous in our decision to pass the last one that came before us.
Thank you, Abby. Thank you, Esmeralda. Is anyone else from HTC? I don't see anybody. Okay. So following the kind of the rules of this appeal process, we go to rebuttals. So would anybody like to, what rebuttals, not to public yet. So I'll get to you, Matt, and there's a couple of hands up here. Anything you want to add from what you heard from HTC from the appellant?
By us or by him?
By you all.
Yeah, he can speak.
No.
He-
No, it's the appellant.
Yes, exactly. The appellant has the opportunity to rebut what they heard.
Okay, just, I don't question, she gave you the scenario and how we got here. The only thing I will say is that the members that voted for it were the same ones that stuck to it for 4 years and said, go south and stop going down towards Union Street. And it was a death by 1,000 cuts. At least the first 2 years, they would change a window. They would change, a pitch. It was death by 1,000 cuts. And it was similar on the second 2 years with Matt, but he made substantial changes as it moved along. And we do appreciate that. We said that at the hearings, except that it was still twice the size of the existing structure, obliterated at least 2 or 3 of the walls, and went down towards Union Street and never put a brick towards the south as a 1-story to lessen how much of the program had to be 2-story, 2.5-story going towards Union Street down the hill. So there's still an element, we're still arbitrary and capricious, no matter how many cuts we took at this thing over 4 years. And it was a long saga. We showed up every single time. There was a lot of fooling around the first 2 years where they would schedule it and we'd all show up. And then at 8:55, they wouldn't show up and they'd continue it. So this was the kind of game that was being played the first 2 years. So we were exhausted. Not only was the HDC exhausted after 4 years, in all the years I've been with the HDC since '83, I've never seen anything take 4 years to get approved. 6 months? Yeah. 4 years? No. So this has been a very contentious issue, not just something they made a mistake on, like in Tom Nevers. This was a very, very fought issue on both sides. But the fact that it might block somebody's pitch and windows, where it doesn't block the upper 2 floors of the one on Orange Street of these same owners, shouldn't have been anybody's concern about not going south. And that's why they didn't go south. They just kept going this direction. So we still make a plea that this was arbitrary and capricious, and at minimum, send it back and we'll work it out again. We've tried to work it out and it just was unsuccessful. I know Ginger had multiple conversations and nothing happened. And Sarah Alger represented it while it was going through the appeal process. And it's been very frustrating for us and exhausting for us, but we've kept going. We never went away. Not even that last day when they made the approval, we didn't go away.
Thank you, Linda. Ginger?
Well, I just like to say in Mr. McEachern's that the plan looks really good on paper. The one that you all saw in the Inky, the drawing, and some of the, it's a computer generated impression, and it's not how the public is actually going to experience it. Now, as part of the HDC process, he did make one really big change, which was a vast improvement in the right direction. It was the first time, I think, in the 4 years that the applicant had any sign that it was not completely deaf to the HDC's concerns. But at that point, it was somewhere around hearing number 7 or 8. If that was enough, then they could have approved it then, but they continued to ask for revisions, which were minuscule in terms of the ridge height, while the structure expanded by 100 square feet of footprint with each subsequent iteration of So it was sort of pairing off of one side and adding it to the other, which seems not to address the concerns of the HDC that it had been saying all along.
Thank you, Ginger. Okay, I think we can go to the public. Matt, do you want to speak? And then we'll go to those who have their hands up.
Thank you. So I just wanted to talk about the architecture, if I could. Specifically, well, first of all, nobody questions the fact that this structure is historic. We're aware of that. We recognize that. And I would say that in terms of the addition, we're not really compromising the existing structure at all. It's wholly visible in its current form. The addition itself actually is an additive mass, so it steps down fairly dramatically. We work with the HDC over the course of, I was involved for 12 months, and we did make a number of significant changes, specifically dropping the height of the structure, dropping the square footage, and stepping it further away from Stone Alley. So there's not a significant grading change to the existing topography. It is a tough site. I also think that this idea of adding to the south is like completely counter to the way that you would normally add to a structure. You would typically add off the rear L of a structure. You wouldn't actually add to the south. This idea of adding to the south, I think, benefits Ginger Andrews, so she can't see the structure. But the reality is a standard addition off of a historic house would be towards the rear of the building. It wouldn't be to the side. That would be atypical. I know that Linda and Ms. Andrews would prefer us to do an addition to the south, but it would just be completely historically counter. You don't add to the side of a building. If you think of pretty much every structure in the core district, when there's an addition, it's a subsidiary additive addition towards the rear. It steps down and away from the main mass. So this idea that we're demolishing the existing structure or significantly altering its fabric, I think is just not true. If you looked at it would be the west elevation, the north elevation, and the south elevation of the existing structure. Those are almost entirely intact. Those don't change. There is one small sunroom element that is on the south that we did replicate. Now, granted, it changed its footprint size, but we did emulate that. As far as Secretary of the Interior Standards, I think if you read those, we literally we check all those boxes. We retain the existing structure. We're not even lifting it. We're not even replacing the foundation. It's staying intact. We have a high level of reverence for the structure, and we've gone through great lengths to do an addition that is complementary to it, that easily distinguishes itself from the existing historic structure. And as far as the grading is concerned, that again, there's representations made that we're doing significant regrading. I mean, the HDC specifically asked us to not do regrading. We don't have a significant amount of retaining walls. They're minimal in some areas, but we literally designed this addition so that it follows the topography and works its way down, along Stone Alley, if you will. I also want to say that before I got involved, I had some level of hesitation because I knew that the history prior to my involvement. All due respect to the previous architect, he wasn't from Nantucket, and I reviewed the drawings, and I didn't really want to get involved, to be honest with you, because I knew it was going to be controversial. But I looked at the drawings and I said to myself that I think that the design approach could be significantly better. And I actually asked for a meeting with Ms. Andrews early on to meet with her after I had spent like 2 or 3 months going through the drawings and coming up with a schematic plan. And I've stayed in contact with her and had plenty of pleasant conversations throughout the process. So I would say that this ownership team and myself have worked incredibly hard to both respect the existing structure and do an addition that was, sympathetic and contextual. And I think it does that. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Anyone else here from the public like to speak? Let's go around. I'll get back to you, Linda. Okay, can we go online? I'll give everybody a chance to come back. Go online.
Okay, so we've got Karen Mara.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I own the home at 10 Orange Street, which is directly across the Stone Alley from to Stone Alley. And I totally support Ginger in her work and in her efforts in this cause. And I would say that if you're standing down below at Union Street and you're looking up, that's where you're really going to see this massive thing coming off the back toward Union Street. So it's where it's positioned. And also, if you're down in the town and you're looking up at the town clock, now you're going to see this great big double size building, which wasn't there before. So it really does, it is affecting, it makes a difference that it's going toward Union Street. And then another major concern of mine is that Stone Alley is a footpath. And I can tell you, there are people walking up and down Stone Alley all the time. They're going right under my windows, which is fine. That's the traditional footpath of the town. But this structure, as it doubles in size and as they keep grooming it more and more, they're trying to make it into a personal driveway, which it's not. It's a public footpath. And even the stones that have been placed up to the wall of my house were put up by the neighbor across the way. And it was before we owned the house, so I wasn't involved. But this kind of encroachment of Stone Alley and taking over this public walkway is something that should be also addressed and noticed. That's it.
Thank you, Karen. We go to the next one.
Yep. Next, we have Stephen Cohen.
Hi, good morning. Good evening, rather. My camera on here. Anyway, I represent the applicant here, but I have the owner of the property, but I do have the unusual position of 4 years ago, previously being hired by one of the neighbors to oppose this project during the prior version of this. And when the owner decided to withdraw that application and apply for a new application, I told him he came to me and asked me if, since I understood the arguments and the reasoning and the design and the history of this, would I help him, do what the HDC was looking for? And he told me he was bringing in Matt and I, pushed that owner very, very hard that if he wanted to have this project approved, he was going to have to meet certain standards that were not going to be what he wanted, but we're going to be consistent with what the HDC would be considered a historically appropriate way to alter this property. And the file shows, and I'll spare you going through the dozens and dozens of changes that Matt made, but the file shows that the HDC had all of this information about Eliza Codd and the Secretary of the Interior guidelines and the history of the property. And the HDC pushed the applicant and Matt to make many changes. And all of this information was considered, and all of these changes were made until it got to the point where the HDC, after thorough consideration, determined that the alterations were now within the guidelines that it was considered to be historically appropriate. I want to take issue with one thing that Ms. Williams said, because she gave one of the grossest mischaracterizations of what arbitrary and capricious means. She basically said that many people had made comments, the HSAB and the Historic Preservation Planner and the abutters and whatever, and because these comments were not followed by the HDC, that somehow that made it arbitrary and capricious. In other words, they didn't do what we said, they got it wrong, so therefore they're arbitrary and capricious. That's not what arbitrary and capricious means. Arbitrary and capricious is a legal standard that is when someone makes a determination that is not with a reasonable basis. It doesn't mean they didn't do what one party wanted. It means they didn't do anything, that it was unreasonable based on the information in front of them. The HDC can really only make an arbitrary capricious decision if it either doesn't follow proper process, if it makes a determination outside of its legal jurisdiction, or if it makes a decision that is incongruent with the facts in front of it. None of that is what happened here. All of the decisions that were made were within thorough consideration of all of the information that was presented, 800 pages of it, 4 years of hearings. and the decision is within its jurisdiction, and the decision was in consideration of all of this information. Some people may not like the decision that was made, but at the end of the day, this board is not charged with determining whether or not they like the decision, or whether or not it was a good decision, or whether or not they should make a different decision. It's only whether or not they had a reasonable and rational basis for the decision that they were made. And I don't know if you have a better basis for asserting that it was a reasonable and rational decision than the fact that it was done after 4 years of hearings with hundreds and hundreds of pages of information, all of which was presented to them multiple times. So I would assert for this board that your job, as you know, is to look at whether or not the HDC made a reasonable decision or based on any reasonable basis. And if it did, regardless of whether or not you like that decision, to then uphold it. And I believe that town council has advised you that that's your role here, probably tonight and many, many times before that. So, as much as I appreciate that Eliza Codd is a special architect in Nantucket's architectural history, and as much as it is ironic that it is International Women's History Day today, none of that is relevant here. What's relevant here is that this board made a decision that is well-reasoned in consideration of all of the information that is being argued tonight and within its jurisdiction. And that's all you need to do is find that the HDC did its job. Whether or not you like that job they did is not the question before you, and whether or not the neighbors like it, and whether or not the preservation planner likes it, and whether or not HSTAB likes it, none of that matters. So I would ask you to support the HDC and to determine that they made a legal, rational, and reasonable decision. That's all, which is the only question in front of you.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
We go to Nina.
So this is Nina King.
Hi. Thank you for taking my comments. I'm also an abutter. I live at 14 right next door to the south and have been participating in the multitude of meetings over the last 4 years. I think that part of what the HCC's job is to maintain the historical character of an existing streetscape. That's part of their job. And while Mr. Cohen makes the point that they had many hearings and there were many adaptations, I don't think that anybody could possibly say that the ultimate redesign maintains the historical carriage house attributes when you double something in size, as well as that you've maintained the historic streetscape of Stone Alley. So you've got, whether we like it or not, to your point, you have a looming structure which cascades down Stone Alley and will forever change that venue. So as people walk by, they're going to be, tunneled between, you already have the structure on the right and you're going to be tunneled now with the structure on the left. And I think that Ginger's point was really well taken, which is you're seeing the drawing, but you're not seeing the actual drawing in the actual landscape. And I think if you were to see that, they would have a much larger impact than just the drawing and all the comments about we only changed, we've kept all the inherent attributes of the original carriage house, which I just don't think is true. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Nina. We'll go to the next one, Erica. You have Donna Martino.
Yep. I was just going to say that.
My name is Donna Martino. I tuned into tonight's meeting because I saw what was on the agenda. And I would just like to make a comment that we need the HDC to preserve and protect our historical integrity. And for this project to take 4 years, I think at the onset, it would probably have seemed to many that it should not have been approved. And also doubling the size, I think it was Nina King who just said, if if you had an actual picture, and architects do this, if you have an actual picture of the new building in the setting, you could really see the effect of doubling the size of an historic edifice. That's all I want to say.
Thank you, Donna. Okay,
You're
now we'll try to give, that's most of the public who's wanted to talk. We'll go back to a couple others. I'm going to go to Arthur Reed first, but I'd like everybody to, I'm going to go to Arthur Reed first. Everybody to just try to keep it to a minute so we can have, because otherwise if we start repeating, then I'll have to stop it. And we're going to, the next section is to go to the board and ask questions to all of you. So Arthur, go ahead.
Thank you. Many years ago, when the world was young and I was in law school, I had occasion to walk around that part of Beacon Hill, which ultimately became part of the Government Center project. And I walked down a street that existed at that time called Bullfinch Street. And one of the houses on Bullfinch Street was the home of Charles Bullfinch, the architect who designed the State House and the U.S. Capitol and so on. And about a year after that, that street was demolished. Everything on that street was demolished, including Bullfinch's house. It became part of what is now the Center Plaza office buildings along Cambridge Street. The point that I would make is that we shouldn't let the same thing. Now, obviously, we're not demolishing Eliza Codd's house, but we're making it unrecognizable and incongruous as such. Don't let the kind of thing that happened back in the 1960s before historic preservation took the route that it has today happen to Eliza Codd's house. Thank you.
Arthur, if we could keep it to new information. Go
Yeah,
ahead, Linda.
just a couple of things. What you should do if it's in your packet is look at the demolition plan. That'll tell you how much fabric is gone, which is more than half is gone. And then obviously there's going to be a rehab inside, and that we don't have any jurisdiction over that. But I just wanted to point that out. If you look at the demo plan, it's a lot more than it's mostly still there. It's not. And when we were talking about going to the rear, this is an interesting structure because the way the barn was set up, you couldn't really have a front door on Stone Alley. So she put the front door on the side facing Orange Street because that's when people would come into it. What we were talking about is sort of a rear, but not a rear. The south side is the side, but it's the rear if you're coming from Stone Alley. So getting rear side is kind of a specious argument. We wanted it to go away from Stone Alley and be lower and be subordinate to the main mass. When I was talking about arbitrary and capricious about all the comments that we've made, HSAB has made, NPT has made, we understand the jurisdiction, but our basis of arbitrary and capricious is the minutes, the substantial minutes and comments made by the HDC themselves. Forget all the collateral stuff. We all hate it. We know it. But forget that. The comments made in the minutes, on the videos, at the meetings, which we've all been at, have been consistent. Subordinate. Holly's comments have been consistent. Subordinate the additions, go south, try to get some of the program south so it's not going east towards Union Street. And if you're the traditional view of the structure is from Union Street, it's obliterated. There's nothing left except for maybe the top ridge from Union Street of that view. That was arbitrary and capricious because they spend hours talking about a side addition up on Main Street and they hold that up. This is a wholesale removal of fabric as well as an addition that is wagging the dog, the tail's wagging the dog. And that is antithesis to anything that the HCC is supposed to be doing with an historic structure. And this has a lot more to it than it's over 50 years. This is an historic structure in an historic setting on Quantity Bank, which was the bank that was cut off to actually make Washington Street and Union Street. That ran all the way to the water. And they cut it, just chopped it off, which is why it's so steep there, to make all the stuff between it and the water possible. Union Street, Washington Street, the rope house that was down there for the whaling ropes, et cetera, et cetera. This is the only structure that is in between Orange Street and Union Street actually on Quantity Bank. So it has a lot more going for it, but I'm really basing our arbitrary capricious on the comments consistently made by the HDC members themselves. And then they went against everything that they had asked for and approved this. That's what we're staking the stake in the sand on. I don't want to get into the architecture because that you can't substitute your judgment, whether you like the design or not. You can't substitute your judgment on the actual design. It's the process that creates the arbitrary and capricious, primarily by the HDC members themselves. I know Ginger has something.
Well, I was just going to reiterate that the HDC itself followed the comments by the advisory boards and historic information up to the point where they approved it. And that seemed to be a complete turnaround of what they've been asking for. So that's all.
Ginger. Can we go to Diane Combs? So we're going to go to an HEC member, and I think I'm going to open it up to the board after that for any questions, comments.
Is it all right for me to go?
I'm sorry.
Yep, it's good.
No, this is Donna Martino. I accidentally brought her in.
Oh, yeah, Diane Combs.
Okay, I sit on this.
Diane's fine.
Oh, that is Diane. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Diane.
I sit on this board, have for the whole length of the meetings. I am not going to say how you should vote. I want you just to know that this was under high concern when it came up for various reasons. I think that to say you have to have a house because it fits into the area and because it follows all the rules is not what the HDC is about. We are about maintaining the historical nature of the island and the houses of importance and the way they are, not whether you're allowed to build because you have a building permit. And I think that is one of the things that we're looking at now. And perhaps you could think that the best thing to do would be to send it back to the HCC and see what happens. It is always a fight to maintain these historic buildings, and yet this is what our mission is. It says to do that and to see how it fits in the neighborhood and whether it fits into part of the neighborhood. It isn't just because you have a building permit and you build. So I think it has to be considered that way as much as whether every T was crossed and every I was dotted. Our thing is to keep this island historic and maintain and save our historic buildings. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Diane. We'll go to Holly Backus and then we'll open up for comments and questions from the board.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make the notation about their Secretary of Interior's standards for rehabilitation, specifically for new additions. It was said that all the boxes were checked, but there's a standard that specifically says that new additions should be smaller than the historic building and it should be subordinate in both sides in design. And clearly this one was not. So I just want to make that point for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Okay, I think we've heard a lot of context and process. So I want to know kind of what the board thinks. If you have any questions, we have Town Council George Pucci. We can ask any questions to him. And we also can ask any questions to the appellant or to architect or anyone else. Dawn?
So obviously there's a very significant amount of information here to sift through. And I, having sat on the HDC for so many years, I'm very sympathetic to the board. I usually do very much like to support their decisions. And I think that they're generally very well thought out. But what I'm really finding missing here, and if someone can point me towards it, the the historic structure form says that this is a contributing structure. And the really big issue here in terms of how I thought about how we always reviewed these applications was there's a very distinct difference between a contributing structure and an individually significant structure in how you treat what would be allowed. And this addition, I could, make my own comments about it, but I don't go above what the board has already said. But it seems like the type of addition that would be added to a contributing structure and not an individually significant structure that has a lot more importance of truly maintaining most of its features, with some concessions for modern living. I don't see a determination by the HDC, and this is what I find is missing, and this is my question, on whether the form was incorrect and that they deemed this an individually significant structure, because I think that would really drive a very different review process.
You're asking me that?
I'm asking anyone who wants to answer it.
Even the Library of Congress, the Habs form down in Washington, D.C. is incorrect. They had it listed as George Upton's house, which seemed to think that the barn had been taken down and a new house constructed, which sort of brings it into more of the modern era, 100 years ago, modern era. And the survey form in the office is absolutely incorrect. We are now taking steps to correct the federal government's information on this structure. The George Upton house is actually in between, I believe, 14 and 16, and it is still there, but it is not this house. So up until this all started, everybody thought it was George Upton's house. The barn had disappeared and a new house, relatively a newer house, had been constructed. That's not correct. So the house itself, now that we have dated the house, gotten the history, we have the old land court plans also. It is clearly predates anything that's on record at the moment until you put all the correct information together. So had they known that information when they did the survey or the Habs and they had done it correctly, it would have been done as a significant structure. So that's why there's sort of a gap in the information that's been on record that was completely incorrect.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, but I just don't really see a lot of, I see Holly's reporting on it, but I don't see a lot of the board in the minutes discussion, and maybe I'm missing it because there's a lot of them about individually significant versus contributing, because I think that that's the real missing piece that I could make an argument that would be an arbitrary and capricious decision by not making a determination.
We brought it up when we corrected the record and I submitted the 100-page report, and Ginger had information as well. We brought it up and they did not consider it. They just bypassed it. For whatever reason, it was more focused on the actual architecture.
Okay. Are you answering this question?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that was exactly my point, in that the HDC never discussed the dueling historic informations, which is a serious lapse of consideration. We did the chain of title, which, the applicant said he didn't want to discuss it, and continued to, in this final, which I believe is actually the fourth application, even though the plan didn't change, presented the same incorrect information.
Thank you, Ginger. I'm going to go to Matt and then Steve Cohen.
Sure. So on that subject, I think that the board reviewed this as an individually significant structure. I know that there was confusion. The documentation that was available to us, which is what the standard by which you would review the application, listed as contributing. But I think that the board, Holly certainly at the outset of every meeting noted that it was an individually significant structure. And I think that the board reviewed it as such.
Okay. Can we go to Steve Cohen?
Just to correct that.
No, can we go to Steve Cohen?
They did not
Hold on
consider
one
that
second.
at all.
Stop.
Okay.
I'm controlling this meeting.
They didn't consider
This is how it's going to get out of hand. Can we go to Steve Cohen, please? I will call on you to speak.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Don, I think you've raised an excellent point. And I do want to note that I discussed that issue with my client probably dozens of times because he kept pointing out to me that the survey form said that it was a not an individually significant structure, and that at every meeting the board treated it that way, and Holly would make that announcement. And we essentially took the position that we would concede that this was going to receive the highest level of review because of the area in which it was in, because of its association with Eliza Codd and otherwise, which is why it went through such a long, drawn-out process in which there was such a significant level of review. I mean, super minutia details and all kinds of consideration to preserve the original house in certain ways. So the board, I don't think reconsidered this issue in terms of like voting on it or deciding it, but it certainly reviewed the application under the individually significant standard as it was told to by Holly at every meeting, and which we conceded that, we never argued you shouldn't hold us to this high standard. They held us to the highest standard, and we let it go that way. So I do think that Don's point is well taken, but I think that a review of the minutes and meetings would show that it was given that high level of review. Thank you.
Don?
I mean, I think that we're missing a determination by the HDC that they were reviewing it as an individually significant structure, and really treating it as such, because the way I read the review in the minutes, and I don't want to substitute my opinion, was that they reviewed it as a contributing structure, and maybe they gave it a little bit higher level of scrutiny, but they never took a vote and made a determination backing up the report that Holly and NPT and others brought in terms of information.
Holly, do you want to weigh in on that? I thought your hand was going to go up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just that due to the extensive research that both Linda, Mary, Ginger have provided through the last 4 years, the first application on that note was denied almost 2 years ago this month, just to put that out there. But it was very apparent that the HDC survey on file from the 1980s, which I'll say this is why we're currently working on updating our surveys, how important they are. Having them almost 40 years old is not sufficient for the HDC to do their job. But it is incorrect at the end of the day. And based on the information that's been provided, the deed research, the title change search, this is an individually significant structure. Now, whether or not the HDC put that really into their review, there was no determination on that. They did not actually sit down and say, as Don has mentioned. I am in the process, based on this research and this information, to update not only our HDC survey with the Massachusetts Historical Commission, the Form B, but really the biggest hurdle is updating the Historic American Building Survey, which is available at the Library of Congress, because that essentially was a whole neighborhood study that took place in the 70s. And that really takes this structure out of the historic. It's incorrect at the end of the day. We need to reflect that record accurately. But to Don's point, it was not something that they really took. They were more focused on the architecture rather than the history, in my opinion. Thank you.
Mayor, I'll get to you 1 second. It's a question just for me to understand. So, just hypotheticals. If it was an individual significant structure with this decision making, it would make sense or not. Or if it was the other way, the contributing, if it was one or the other, which would be arbitrary or capricious?
Contributing would give more leeway to do an addition of this significance than an individually contributing structure.
All right.
Where individually significant structure, excuse me, where I feel like those have always been treated, in my experience, of remaining very much more intact with much more minimal changes.
So you're wondering if because that wasn't
because they never made a determination that it was individually significant and what features were individually significantly important to be preserved. I don't see any of that in the record. And that, you know, and I do generally support people's property rights and the HGC's process, but I feel like the highest charge of the HGC is on these deemed individually significant structures. And that's what has to have the utmost scrutiny. And I think it's missing.
Okay. Mary?
Yeah, hi, Mary Bergman. I wanted to pick up briefly on what Don said, which I think as somebody who's watched the HDC a lot over the last, 5-6 years, it is that determination moment that's missing. And I think missing in other things that end up at your table too. If we were to sit down and decide, is this significant? Is this worthy of preservation? And then making it, then you make one decision the other way or one down another road. And I think that's what's missing. And it's trying to, I think the HDC functions very well as an architecture review board, especially with new construction. But it is that trying to figure out that determination is difficult. Other towns where they don't have that many, they don't have 100 applications a week. They'd have one hearing on just 2 Stone Alley to decide the significance. And I think that's missing. And I know the HDC has a lot going on, but that, in the review of the HDC that the select board's going to undertake or consider, I think that's a real thing, is how do we determine what's the highest level of significance and who's making that decision? Thanks.
Thank you. Board, any other comments on this? Brooke?
I have a couple questions. I heard reference through you to Holly about the increase in square footage recommendation under the Secretary of Interior recommendations. Does the status of the building make a difference in regard to that? And if someone could please clarify for me what the actual increase in square footage is it double or is it triple? Because I'm not sure. I'm hearing different numbers.
I heard 556 to 1050.
But is 1050 the addition or the total after the addition?
Holly?
The addition, and I'll defer to Matt as the architect, but I'm pretty sure is the addition was approved at 1,051 square feet to the existing 556 square foot.
So it's tripling the square, almost tripling the square footage. And so my follow-up question is, does its designation as contributing versus historically significant make a difference in terms of what that allowable or recommended increase would be? And I think that's part what you're speaking to, Don. But
and was that just more of just a general question, or would you like George Pucci to jump in on that for that?
Well, I'd like it to be corrected factually, and then to understand it from the preservation planner's perspective on what the difference would be in terms of scale of addition if it were one designated one versus the other.
Right. Mr. Chair, if I read it, if it is a individual significant structure, which there seems to be a lot of support that in fact it is, then that large addition would be outside the guidelines of the HTC themselves, of the SOI or the building in Nantucket in mind, because it says addition should be smaller than the historic structure, subordinate to both design and size. So if it is, then those rules have not been followed. If I'm wrong, I'd like someone to correct me.
We go be quick, Linda.
You're not wrong in principle. There's more to it, getting rid of architectural features that are significant on the structure, which they are. I just want to back up for a second. The word contributing, as it's normally used for HDC purposes, especially those survey forms, which are all 1989, meant that it's over 50 years. Now, there are various other determinations on that on the federal level and the state level, but where we've been using it loosely, the word contributing meant that on those forms in 1989, the structure was built after 1939. So we've been going around and around. I know Holly has a new letter going out to everybody about what that means, but that's generally what we're talking about when most of the lay people talk about contributing, is that it's over 50 years or less than 50 years. But the word contributing is not dispositive as to whether it is a significant structure. So I don't want to get sort of lost in this. But this particular structure, given the location, given the history of it with the person, it's got an individually significant place and time, as well as person and architecture. So that's what makes this thing significantly impactful to the neighborhood, to the architecture of Nantucket. So there's a bigger picture here, but don't get lost in the word contributing versus architecturally significant, because it is, because of a whole host of reasons. But the word contributing here usually means it's less than 50 or more than 50 years old.
Thank you. Matt?
Just want to talk about this square footage. So the 1,000 square feet, I don't actually have the exact numbers, but that 1,000 square feet does include a basement that's below grade under a deck. So I don't think it reflects the actual square footage above grade, if that makes any sense. So there's a connected deck and there's a full basement underneath that. So when you look at the total square footage, it's a larger number. I think the total square footage is larger than the existing footprint of the structure. But as far as contributing versus individually significant, as an applicant, we can only work with the information that we have. Okay, so the survey's listed as contributing. To Stephen's point, Holly at the outset of every meeting said that this was an individually significant structure. So I think that the review process treated it as an individually significant structure. But if you go just based on what we had to work with, it was listed as contributing. If that makes any sense.
Thank you. Any other question? Holly, do you have something? Sorry, see your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to notate that out of the building with Nantucket in mind, and I call it yours, it's everybody's, it's the Nantucket's building with Nantucket in mind. The definition of contributing structure is a structure which adds to the district's sense of time, place, and historic development. However, the significant structures in definition is any structure within the historic district of Nantucket Island, which in its whole or in part 50 years or more old, or which has less than been designated by the commission to be a significant structure after a finding by the commission that the building is either importantly associated with one or more historic persons or events, or with the broad architectural, cultural, political, economic, and social history of the island of the Commonwealth of Nantucket, or Commonwealth of Massachusetts, or historically architecturally significant in terms of period, style, method of building construction, or association with a famous architect or builder, either by itself or in context of a group buildings. So based on the definition within the books, that and the history of this structure itself, if this survey, and then I just want to put an assumption out there, but if the survey was done appropriately in the 1980s, I would think it would have been listed as a individually significant structure. Therefore, that's why it's been presented as that through the review process. Again, this is why we're trying to update our surveys. And on that note, the new methodologies that the Massachusetts Historical Commission requires for our HDC surveys, or what they actually call Form Bs, actually does not determine the difference between an individually significant or significant. All structures that are contributing towards the district will have a survey. And that's very important because based on our new approved survey plan for the island, we're not going to be surveying structures that are non-contributing. I hope that helps. Thank you.
I kind of want to try to bring it back to, it's, from what I'm hearing, it was presented to the HTC that this is an individually significant structure. It might not be in the minutes, but it was presented that way. So to me, I think, at least right now, what I'm hearing, I would assume that that's how they viewed it. I think. I mean, somebody could say, no, I mean, I've already heard that Holly presented it that way.
I just don't see any discussion about the difference between the two and any determination on it.
If I could, Mr. Chair, I would just say that the only information that we had available on file was contributing. But at the outset of every meeting, Holly clearly specified that she felt that this was an individually significant structure at every meeting, and went through a fairly lengthy description about how important she felt this structure was. So the notion that the HDC wasn't aware, I think is just, that's not the case. I mean, you can ask Abby, HDC is here.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Abby can speak to that question. I don't see any, I understand that Holly presented it that way, and obviously she works for the HDC and had a lot of information about it. but I don't see the board ever really taking that up as part of the review on whether it truly was individually significant and what features of the structure needed to be preserved. Because for example, I know that it was mentioned that the sunroom was being replicated. On the drawings, the sunroom windows are kind of incorporated, but it doesn't look anything like the existing sunroom. It's not coming off the way the existing sunroom does. And that's not for me to review, but that's just an example of how I think the review might have gone differently if the HDC really determined that that feature was individually significant and needed to be preserved intact.
Can I clarify that, Mr. Chairman, quickly?
No. 1 sec. We go to Steve Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that there is a distraction occurring right now by this somewhat false suggestion that there wasn't a proper process followed or proper guidelines followed. And I think it's really important to clarify that. The Secretary of the Interior guidelines are not binding on the HDC. And oftentimes the HDC in its history makes determinations that are in conflict with those on purpose, because those guidelines are not how we do preservation here. A lot of them we follow and some of them we specifically reject. They are not binding on the HDC, nor is the HDC required to make a determination about whether or not a structure is contributing or individually significant in order to make its determination. The HDC, under its own statute, is only required to look at what is a historically appropriate renovation or alteration of the structure based on the history of that structure, based on the architectural design of that structure, based on the neighborhood and the history of the neighborhood. And the HDC did that. It followed the proper process in doing that. It looked really hard at the history of this structure, both the architectural history and the association with Eliza Codd. It was told dozens of times by the preservation planner how important it was and that it was individually significant. They didn't have to agree with or disagree with or vote on whether or not they were doing that. They were told it dozens of times, and they used the highest level of review in this. It's a historic structure associated with a historic architect in a highly visible area of downtown Nantucket. And Matt will tell you, I think he, practically pulled his hair out trying to deal with how significant the review process was. So any suggestion that it was treated as a contributing structure and lackadaisically let go, with a lower level of review is just not reflective of either the law or the actual occurrence at the hearings. The only thing you should be doing at this point is saying, did the HDC make a decision based on a consideration of the record? And if the HDC made its decisions based on the consideration of the record, which includes all of this information about Eliza Codd and the hearing and the significance of the structure, it doesn't matter if they made a good decision or a bad decision. It doesn't matter if that decision was in conflict with or in line with the Secretary of the Interior standards. It only matters if they considered all of this information and then made a decision based on that information, regardless of whether or not it was a good or bad decision. And that is the standard of what is arbitrary and capricious. And I would argue, if you look at the HDC's Enabling Act, they have followed their own rules, which is to determine that this is the appropriate way to alter this structure, given the history of the structure, the association of the structure with Eliza Codd, and the location of the structure in this neighborhood, all of which was done over literally 100 hours or more of review, just a mind-numbing amount of review.
Thank you, Stephen. Can you wrap up? Thank you. Sorry. Well, I was saying thank you as in I wanted him to kind of wrap up. Sorry, Stephen, we didn't mean to cut you off like that. We're going to go to Linda and Arthur in a second, but Matt, you have something?
Just a question for Matt McEachran, but if you want to go to these guys first.
Yeah, Linda, then Arthur. But I want to also come back to other questions that the board might have.
Yeah.
Linda?
Just quickly, you're correct. Holly said it every single meeting. We said it every single meeting. We presented all the information on the history and the significance of this, not least of which was my 100-page report. However, Dawn is correct. there was never a discussion with the board, a back and forth discussion. It was us presenting, Holly presenting, and then it was never discussed again. Most of the time at any meeting, how the board members saying it was historically significant. So Dawn is correct. It's not in the record because they didn't really actually have an exchange of that information. They heard us every single meeting and then went about talking about the architecture because that's why Matt was there, not to discuss that part of it. But you're correct. They did not specifically make that judgment. They did not specifically have a back and forth discussion about the historic aspect of that structure. They accepted our stuff and then went on.
Thank you. Arthur?
I think that the point that's come out in discussion here tonight, that the extent of the addition to this house treated as an individually significant structure is inconsistent with the way that the HDC has typically treated such structures, and particularly how Building with Nantucket in mind addresses that. Makes the case that the HDC's action was in fact arbitrary and capricious, and that either you should overturn the decision on that basis, or that it should be returned to the HDC so that they can consider that issue on remand and determine the issue with proper consideration and properly documented consideration as to the status of the structure as being individually significant.
Thank you, Arthur.
Thank
Matt,
you.
you had a question?
Yeah, a couple comments, couple questions. I'm kind of leaning toward a remand. I think the bar is high on these, on this type of thing. I think, it's got to be whimsical. It's got to be without thought. Clearly, they had thought in it. Most of the time, it's kind of ironic. Most of the time, we're having these hearings. It's because it's sort of, it feels like usually it's the other way around. Usually it's the group that's aggrieved is saying, the HDC wasn't being, sort of historical enough. And today it's, the other way around. I just, it's sort of ironic. That area is, it's similar to something we had probably 15 years ago on Lincoln Circle, where one homeowner wanted to build the edge of their house out, sort of 5 or 10 feet in front of all the other houses. And so historically that had a line of houses for, 100 years, 150 years. And one person wanted, when they did their renovation, wanted to block the view of the neighbors on the left and the right side. And so this sort of reminds me of that, which sort of leads me to a couple questions for Matt. First is, in the demo plan, Matt, how much of how many of the original windows will remain, and what are happening with the wall, the 3 walls that you aren't demoing? Are those all going to remain all original material? What's the plan?
Yeah, the 3 exterior walls, the west, north, and south, and portions of the east will remain. Obviously, the area where the addition attaches on the east will be demolished, not completely demolished, but all 4 corners of the house will still exist.
Are you keeping interior and exterior in both of those? Not that it's our purview, but
Interior partitions.
okay.
Interior partitions will be reconfigured.
Okay. How about the interior walls on those 3 walls? I'm just trying to gauge, is what Linda's saying true? Is
Yeah,
it going to be
the
complete? Are we
exterior.
going to look at it completely,
Yeah, I mean, which is not, I would say, is uncommon for a project like this, that we're keeping the foundation. A majority of historic structures like this will lift the building and put a new foundation under it. The existing foundation is staying intact. The exterior stud walls will remain intact. The rafters will remain intact. A majority of the windows that have been designated, I don't know exactly what the number is, but if we wanted to change those out like kind, we would have to go back to the HDC. So this notion that the structure is being destroyed or demolished, I think is just not accurate at all. The facade of the building is still, if you look at the facade of the building, pre or existing condition versus our proposed, there is no difference. There's no difference between the north elevation and the addition renovation. And I would say that on the south, that's not the case. But as far as that small sunroom, and I know Don, you had mentioned that sunroom has been detailed. We had the building 3-dimensionally scanned. So we literally are copying the exact detailing of it. Now it is moving slightly, but it is exactly the way it's in its current incarnation.
And there's been some suggestion to go south. Why can't any of the program go south?
I mean, theoretically, it could. It doesn't really comport with our program. And the shape of the lot is such where the majority of the area is to the east. And then again, the facade of the house faces west. So the idea of adding to the south, we probably could add to the south, but it wouldn't be of any significance. And it's really not what the owner wants to do. And it's not in keeping with what the historic addition would be. But adding to the south is something that Ms. Andrews would prefer because it benefits her. She doesn't want to see the addition. And I guess I understand that, but it's not for any historic reason. It's because the abutting property owner prefers that, which I respect.
But the abutting property owner in the front is your owner, is the same owner.
Correct.
Who doesn't want to see it either. Ideally, if you
Correct.
went that way
Right.
and had a 2-story building, he wouldn't have his view of the harbor.
Correct. This is correct. Yes.
Yeah. So this is why it sort of that's what I was guessing. I just looked online. This is what reminds me a bit of what happened, and this is what happened in Lincoln Circle. Somewhere up on the cliff, and we remanded it, and somehow they all kind of figured it out, and we didn't get it back. But the other part is one of the HDC's charges is the kind of the place. It's the keeping the area and the place intact. That area when I was a kid, there was a walk. This is not there now, but there was a walk that went from there almost all the way down
To Union Street.
Yeah.
It's still there. You can still walk.
Yeah,
You can still do it? Okay. I haven't done it. There was one on the roof. There was one on the bluff.
But you can still walk. You
Yeah.
can still walk down to Union Street. The other
No,
thing
I'm not
about,
asking for that. I'm just saying it's just interesting. Over time, there are these changes. That's the point I'm making. That area there was a walkway there that as a kid, I remember one Halloween, we went down there and we slid in our Halloween costumes down the face of all the fancy houses there with the nice sledding areas.
yeah,
So
you can still do it.
Yeah.
If I could also just
not
add,
there, further down.
to the notion of adding to the south, the amount of area that we could add to the south doesn't really comport to the program. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, just architecturally, in terms of how the house is going to be used. Number one. Number two is that is the only real level area for the property. So in terms of outdoor, using the outdoor space on that property, that south area is really the only location to do it. The rest of the house, you've got a decent amount of room towards the east to do the addition. I would also just point out that the HTC specifically requested us to. We identified the building in terms of 3 parts: the historic section is section A, and then for the addition, we called it section B and section C. So there's 3 masses, if you will. Our initial submission had 2 stories over sections B and C. We eliminated the entire second floor program over section C, and that section C, which is the tail end of the addition, is a 1-story addition, essentially. No, because it's a slope grade, the foundation is exposed and it's a brick foundation, and we tried to emulate the historic detailing to comply with that. Also, the section B, we dropped that 4 feet from where it started. And we actually also dropped the second floor elevation. So there's a series of steps inside the house, which is something I personally don't like to do. I think they're tripping hazards. Also, the owner, Tony, I think he's like 6'4", and his second floor bedroom it's not great. So I would just say that throughout the entire process, we have literally listened to everything that the HTC has said, done everything that they've asked, and that's it.
No, I think the change, I'll comment. I think those changes were substantial from the beginning till the end. They really were when you follow it. So.
Any other comments? We're going to close the public hearing soon. Any other comments or questions from the board?
I would just like a read from town council, but we can do that after we close the public hearing, or should we do it now?
You can do it now, because then, I like to leave the public hearing open as long as possible so we can still talk to the public. Once we close it, it's just us.
Okay.
We can talk to town council then.
Okay.
But
I'll hold it till then.
okay.
Oh,
Ginger?
I just wanted to, excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. I said Ginger. Go
I
ahead.
just wanted disagree with Mr. McEachern's characterization of my objections, because my view of the harbor is winter only, and this house will not affect it at all. The thing that I'm considering is actually how the public experiences coming up Stone Alley. My house is set significantly back. The closest point is 12 feet from the property line, which is Stone Alley is only 16 feet wide, or 15 in spots. And the east end is 16 feet off the property line. This is significantly closer, and granted, I have a tall house. I'm sorry, it's an 18th century two-family. It had a major 19th century renovation. It crept uphill rather than downhill, but it's the experience of the public coming up and down Stone Alley with where there are now trees, massive trees, but an even more massive building is going to come there. That's the experience that will change. And Stone Alley is kind of sacred to a lot of people.
Thank you. I want to try to bring us back to process and arbitrary and capricious, although I do love envisioning Matt in his ghost outfit sliding down something.
It was a turtle.
The turtle.
I was a green turtle with a box.
I always appreciate those walk down history with you, your childhood, Matt. But what other, process, arbitrary, capricious, you brought up a really good issue, Don. Anything else in that aspect? Okay, if you have nothing.
I don't believe it was arbitrary and capricious, because I think they put a lot of time into it. I think, so I'm having a hard time determining that, which is why I'm sort of leaning toward a remand. So.
Right. We can kind of get into
Yeah,
where we sit after we close the public hearing, I think. But any other questions for the appellant or HTC? Okay, does somebody want to make a motion?
I move that we close the public hearing.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Matt?
Yeah, so
Do you want to close the public
yes,
hearing?
aye,
Okay,
yep.
so that passes.
Yep.
Okay, so we can talk amongst ourselves, and we can ask Mr. Pucci any questions as well.
George, if we were to make a motion to remand for HTC to actually have a significant discussion about whether the structure is considered individually significant and the features that are important to maintain and the scale, because I think that's completely missing from the record, would that be appropriate? Or legal?
Through the chair, good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board, George Pucci from Town Council's office. Yes, based on what you said earlier, Dawn, especially on your experience of the standards that apply with the HDC, if you find the record is lacking in that, an actual determination on the issue of individually significant structure, that would be a reasonable basis for you to affirm the appeal. Either vacate the certificate of appropriateness, or you could move to affirm the appeal and remand to the commission for a finding on that issue. And if it is so determined that it's an individually significant structure, whether the proposal is appropriate, and if not, in whole or in part, specifically what's inappropriate about the proposal and how it can be changed. The enabling legislation does, in the case of a denial, encourage the commission to not just deny something, but to suggest areas that could be amended or improved so that they could ultimately get a certificate of appropriateness. So in answer to your question, yes, it would be grounds for you to affirm the appeal if you were to find that to be lacking in the record. And in follow up to the earlier definition of arbitrary and capricious, to find that something is arbitrary and capricious, you would have to find that there's an absence of information or evidence in the record that a reasonable mind would deem reasonable to support the decision. So if you find that lacking in the record, you would have the ability to remand it for that determination. The only thing I would point out is you want to be clear about what the standard is. And I know another board member tonight was asking for specifics. Well, you know, in the event of that individually significant structure, what are actually the performance standards that would apply, that the applicant has to apply with, has to comply with? And I didn't really hear a discussion of that tonight in terms of, well, what concrete standards would you apply to this? If those standards are provided in building with Nantucket in mind, that would give a reasonable basis to act on that. But it's not enough in itself to just find individually significant structure. You then have to go on and say, well, what alterations can be appropriate for this individually significant structure? So hopefully that answers your question.
I would say the thing that I'm concerned about is while it was read into the record numerous times that, you know, Holly presented and that the appellants during the process presented, there was nothing in the record that the HDC acknowledged that change. And so it seems to me they normally rely on a card that in this case was inaccurate. And without something in the record acknowledging, formally acknowledging that information was incorrect, the architect himself stated that that was the only thing that they had to go on, was what was on a card that was then deemed incorrect, and we're told that that was accepted, but I see nothing in the record that was acknowledged officially. And I think that's the thing that's missing for me in this is just because it was stated doesn't mean that the members were thinking about it or considering this application based on that recognition of it as a individually significant structure. And so for that reason, I would probably support remand.
Yeah, I would just add both the recognition and the true discussion of how would we review this differently and what things would we apply to the review of this that would be, sometimes quite different between individually significant and something contributing that's just because it's over 50 years old. I mean, it brings me back to, like, for an example, the Starbuck Kilbert house on Main Street, which we know was significantly altered on the interior. The actual shape of the exterior is pretty much intact. And they chose to build a separate, more modern cottage at the back corner of the property, rather than putting a big addition on it that would have taken away the original shape of the house. So that's just one that I remember coming before when I was on the board. And there are some things that I don't love that happened with that house, but it still really does have its character of shape. That this is changing quite significantly, and reviewing it as contributing, the addition, I feel the HTC would be more inclined to allow an addition of this size if they weren't thinking about the individual significance and acknowledging it and really having that thorough discussion that I just don't see that happened, even though it was presented every time.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, at first I had some trouble looking for the arbitrary nature of this, because after 4 years, most everything has been discussed. But then when it got back to this individual significant, if it is individually significant house, which apparently it is or may not be, then they have not followed the guidelines that were appropriate for such a structure. So that's where I'm kind of looping around here. So I may or may not disagree with their decision, but I'm not sure if it's really an individual significant structure. The appropriate guidelines were followed in granting this approval.
Matt?
But I'd wonder how often the guidelines are followed in a lot of circumstances. And that's the difficult thing. And even if we follow so anyway, Yeah, I know, but it's sort of, they aren't followed in a lot of situations. What's the president? And they're not followed in a lot of situations. I'm not saying that's a good thing. You know, and I think the Kilvert House is a great example, Don, of something from the outside that looks good, but it's no longer, you know, it's no longer, in my mind, a historic home. You know, it's a, you know, it's so because of what happened on the inside. And so that is, you know, that's what's sort of troubles me with a lot of the building that's happened sort of in the last 10, 20 years downtown, is a lot of the insides are completely, you know, gone. And the outside looks great, but the inside isn't. So I don't know.
Well, Mr. Chair, I think, yeah, guidelines are guidelines. They're not rules and regulations, but something, a house as significant as this, the guidelines should need to be followed. This is not some other historic structure. I mean, we've heard the significance of this house multiple times tonight.
So if we remand, what's the goal? If we remand, what are we asking? We're asking them to make a consideration of whether it's individually significant and discuss that aspect, and then to come back with, you know, find what can be done. They may easily find that it's, you know, it's significant and this can be done. This is what we said could be done and we think it can be. In which case we're not much worse off than we are now, because then that can still be, you know, sort of taken to the next level if need be. And our record for the town side will be in better shape potentially than it is now. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, they could very well determine that this is appropriate, but I do think that the discussion really is lacking in making that determination and really discussing how you can add to a house that is individually significant. It's really missing from the communication, unless maybe it's on the tapes, but I don't see anything in the minutes to support that. And
we have a member who voted for it, who sent us a letter saying he couldn't speak to it. So
I mean, I
think
have a
there's some
feeling that the
hesitancy.
review may be a little bit different if they really have that thorough discussion. And the HTC can, you know, it's private property, all of these homes, and anything can happen on the interior unless it has an interior restriction. But the HDC does govern the exterior throughout the island. But individually significant structures, that's their charge and our charge as having this come before us to try to preserve those as much as we can and make sure that they're handled correctly. And I think that there's a lack in the record of handling it correctly.
So for me, if I were going to move to remand this, it would be based on the fact that that issue was never clarified in the record, and that I would remand it with a request that that be so clarified, and that they review the process by which they decided and confirm that it complies with that determination if they make that determination. I mean, they can go back and just go through the record and say, just reconfirm that the decisions they made and the guidelines that they followed, or the procedure that they followed was with that in consideration once they've made that determination. And if it wasn't, that they have an opportunity to review it based on that determination. So
I'll second your motion. If that's a motion.
It was a wordy motion.
Yeah.
You mean to pare it down?
No, if you're ready to make a motion, you can.
Yep. So I would move that we remand because it's unclear as to whether this was reviewed as a historically significant structure or a contributing structure based on the inaccuracy in the written record, and that the HDC make that determination and then review their decision under whatever designation they give the property upon review.
Could you
Go ahead.
add that they review it based on what features
Hold on a
of
second.
the structure?
I think technically we have to second her motion for discussion,
Okay.
right? Like that's her motion, so we have to second it or not.
Second.
Okay, now for discussion. Now you can, what's the process? You
I
make
mean,
a,
I'd like you to
friendly-
add that they can now review it for the features that are important to preserve based on the guidelines.
Okay, that they should review it.
That they have the ability to.
Okay.
It's not just to correct the record.
Okay,
you accept that
I do, if that's clear.
edit to the motion?
Yes.
Is that, Mr. Pucci, is that the exact way to do it?
Yeah, I think that that works. I mean, that was what I was saying earlier, is that the issue that Dawn raised about the lack of clarity on whether that finding was made as to individually significant structure, she finds the record inadequate on that issue, and she'd like a finding on that. Once you make that finding, though, that you have to go ahead and have the HDC review it. If they don't make that finding, essentially they would probably reach the same decision. If they do make the finding, is there anything in the analysis in terms of performance standards that would apply to an individually significant structure that they would then deem this proposal to be inappropriate? So essentially, the way Brooke stated it really essentially clarifies it for the commission. The board wants them to make the finding on individually significant structure, and if they so find, to review the proposal and apply the standards that would apply to individually significant structure if they so find.
Okay, so Mr. Pucci, you feel that the motion is clear and appropriate?
Yes, I think the motion is perfectly clear and appropriate.
For remand, okay.
You would want to, yeah, inherent in that is that you would be moving to affirm the appeal and remand for a determination on the issue of whether this is an individually significant structure, and if that finding is made, to review the application under the performance standards that apply to individually significant structures.
So it's not upholding the appeal, it's affirming the appeal with a remand? Is that the correct term?
Correct. Upholding or affirming the appeal, either one.
Okay, so the way George just restated my motion is perfect to what I intended.
And do we need that? Did you get all that, Erica? Or is that something we can look back?
I got most of it, and I will clarify it in the video tomorrow.
Okay.
My only concern is I don't want to be, I'm worried, not worried. I don't find it arbitrary and capricious. I find that there's things that we have to, we're sending it back to make sure we correct the record and look at it. But I'm not saying that, I'm having a hard time saying it was, arbitrary and capricious. I'm having a hard time saying there wasn't any thought, et cetera. So I don't want it to sound like I don't back that.
So,
well, Mr. Chair, I want to make clear, I believe that if it is an individual significant property, it was an arbitrary decision based on some lack of information and lack of following the guidelines. I want that clear, but I will support the present motion.
So, Mr. Pucci, so by affirming and remanding this, we are saying it was arbitrary and capricious because of this. So we're sending it back.
You are. And again, on arbitrary and capricious, it's either that the HDC acted contrary to law, or there's an absence of evidence in the record that a reasonable person would find adequate to support the decision. So inherent in Dawn's concern about this, the lack of the finding, then from her perspective, she is not finding evidence in the record upon which a reasonable person could find adequate to support the decision. So that's where that would come from, the assumption in Dawn's motion and Brooke's motion. If Matt feels that there is evidence in the record that a reasonable person would deem sufficient to support the decision, then, I don't want to tell a member how to vote, but that would warrant, not voting in favor of this motion, because that's application of the arbitrary and capricious standard.
Yeah, I think we're getting a little bit of maybe legalese and semantics, but I do not believe this is arbitrary and capricious at all. Depending on it's different than what I feel about the house and the preservation of it. I don't think it was arbitrary and capricious. And let me ask you this, Mr. Pucci, it was said here tonight on the record that it was presented as an individually significant, right? It was presented that way. Are we only to go on what is in our packet, what is in the minutes? I mean, I think that's what
You can only go on the record.
Yeah,
asking
you're going on the
Pucci.
record. Yeah, you're going on the record before you. You know, on that issue too, you don't have to get too caught up in the language either about the significance of the structure, because the enabling legislation provides for this. As the preservation planner had pointed out earlier, Section 2 of the Act talks about the purpose of the legislation is preservation and protection of historic buildings, places, or districts of historic interest. And then when it talks about whether the commission should determine whether exterior architectural features are appropriate, in Section 9, it says, they shall keep in mind the purposes of the act as set forth in Section 2 that I just quoted to you. And then they will consider general design, arrangement, texture, material, color of the building or structure, location on the lot in relation to such other factors, to similar features of other buildings or structures in that area. So the ability to protect a historically significant structure and setting, it is the heart of was protected by the enabling legislation. So whether you look at it as an issue of not making the finding of an individually significant structure, and if so, what alterations can be made to that, or if you just look at the purpose and the considerations that are set forth in the enabling legislation, it provides and it compels the protection of historically significant buildings and settings. So if under the circumstances you find an inadequate amount of evidence to support allowing the proposed alteration under those circumstances, that would be a basis for finding that the commission was arbitrary and capricious. If, on the other hand, you think that the record is sufficient, that a reasonable mind could look at the evidence and say, no, they took everything into consideration and they allowed, they found appropriate alterations to this particular historic structure in conjunction with its setting, that there's a reasonable basis for their decision allowing the proposal to go forward. So either way you come out on it, you still have to come down to that finding to uphold the appeal that there's an absence of sufficient evidence on the record to support the commission's decision.
Okay, thank you. So if this is voted through, we know what happens. If it doesn't vote through, are we done tonight, or we go back to another vote?
No, if the vote does not, if the motion fails, then the appeal fails, and that results in a denial of the appeal.
Okay, I'm asking some basic questions. We're just trying to review before we go. So I don't feel this is arbitrary capricious. I don't think I could vote for it. I think it was presented, and even though it wasn't in the record, I don't think it's enough to make it arbitrary capricious. Just my thoughts before we vote. Any other thoughts, questions for George?
I'll just reiterate that it's interesting, this phrase arbitrary and capricious, because to me, in some way, it implies somebody sort of an intention of failure or missing something or overlooking something. And what was compelling to me is town council's description of a lack of evidence in the record of something defining arbitrary and capricious, regardless of intent or anything else. And to me, I don't know if the commissioners, given the uncertainty of the status of this home, I don't know from the record whether they actually took that into account. There's nothing that states that they as individuals knew, despite it being told to them, that they were considering this application with that in mind. And so that's the piece that's missing to me, not the fact that it was read into the record, but I have no confirmation of what was on the minds of the commissioners, whether they were disregarding that advice from the preservation planner or not in evaluating this. And what I'm asking is for them to go back, determine whether or not this is a historically significant structure, state that they know that it is or isn't, and then review their decision through that lens. So for the record, it's clear that that's what happened. That's what's missing in the record for
Good
me.
review. Yeah.
Well said.
Yes. As always, Brooke. Anything else from this, from the gray sweater side? All right, we're all got gray sweaters on.
All right. Yeah, I'm having, I think I think what you said, Burke, is exactly right. I'm having a hard, sometimes we've kind of split the difference and we haven't found from one side or the other. We've remanded back, and I'm having a little bit of a difficult time because I think arbitrary and capricious is a very high standard. And I think if we lower that at all, that we will, we'll see a lot more of these. And so I think that's, we've typically support the HDC, at least in my tenure, 99% of the time, because the standard is so tough to, so anyway, that's why I thought, is there a way to do it in between? So
I'm not basing the decision on arbitrary and capricious. I'm basing the decision on lack of them identifying that they were considering it as individually significant and what features were important to be kept and how it was being reviewed compared to if it was just a contributing structure. And I don't think I have ever voted to send something back to the HDC. I have had a very clear record since 2015 of upholding the HDC's decisions. So I don't think it's going to open the door for a flood, but this one issue is really important to me when it comes to something that is truly a significant historic structure. There's a lot on the island that's not. This is not them reviewing a fence or a shed or a pool. This is an individually significant historic structure.
So I'm a little worried that everybody's saying they don't think it's arbitrary and capricious because that's the standard we have to hold.
That's my point.
The lack of information makes it arbitrary and capricious. It doesn't mean that they weren't thoughtful or considerate or any of those things. I'm not maligning the work. I'm saying there's an absence in the record of a piece of information that makes the decision unclear to me. And I believe what town council has said is that makes it arbitrary and capricious, as much as we don't like those words, because they imply that the HDC is falling down on their job. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the record doesn't reflect an important piece of information. I'm asking that to be corrected on remand. That's it. So therefore it is arbitrary and capricious. That's the standard, but only for this reason. And I think this property is unique because the card was incorrect, right? Historical research proved that the card that the architect based his planning on was incorrect. That muddies this for me, and I want that clarified. So it is arbitrary.
It is arbitrary and capricious.
Yeah.
For those very specific reasons.
Okay. I don't think we've done a vote in a long time. That's not roll call. So we will say all those in favor, say aye.
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 All those against? Aye. So that passes 4-1. So
Thank you very much for the consideration.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everyone. That was a very good discussion.
Ugh.